Good morning. We look today at 2 Samuel 16 through 18. And David is on the run. His son Absalom has been welcomed back, more or less, so to speak, but has now raised up an army of his own to come against his father. And so David has left Jerusalem, and as we begin chapter 16, it says David had gone a little past the summit of a mountain or whatever, and Ziba met him. And Ziba, if you remember, was a servant of Saul, of Jonathan, Jonathan's son, the son of Saul, and was the one who had taken this grandson, and in the escape with the grandson had become crippled with both feet. But Ziba comes to David with all kinds of provisions, a couple of donkeys, 200 loaves of bread, 100 bunches of raisins, summer fruits, and all of this. And David is a little bit surprised by this. Why have you brought these? He says, and he says, these are for you, the king. And David says, well, but where is your master's son? Meaning this Mahuthalesbeth, or whichever. I can never pronounce those people's names, but where is he? And the response is that he remained in Jerusalem because he figures that today the kingdom of Israel will be restored to him, and he will now be king, the grandson of Saul. And David, doesn't really respond, but he says, all that belonged to that man, the cripple's grandson, is now yours, he says to Ziba. And then when David gets to another town, and another relative of Saul, it says from the house of Saul, who knows, a cousin or whichever, but comes out and he's cursing David and throwing stones at David and all of his men. And some of David's men say, well, let's dispatch him, let's kill him. And David said, no, he was given the opportunity to curse me and to throw stones at me, and this is his God-given right. And David says, just, let him be that way. And then he also says that maybe the Lord will look upon my distress and will repay me with good because of this cursing today. And then we come back to Absalom coming into Jerusalem. And as we ended chapter 15, it said that this Hushai, Hushai in my Bible, is a friend of David. Well, here this Hushai greets Absalom, and this other Antipathol is with him. And they greet Absalom as he comes. And Hushai's greeting is, long live the king, long live the king. And Absalom says, I thought you were friends with David. Why aren't you with him? What's going on here? I mean, and he says, basically, I have served the king, and I will continue to serve the one who is the king. And whom shall I serve? Should it not be his son? I served your father. Why shouldn't I serve you? And then these two men and Ahithophel. I mean, that's maybe how you say that. Ahithophel and Hushai are both somewhat seers, so Absalom says, give us your counsel, what shall we do? And this Ahithophel says, go pursue David, and when he's all, when they hear that you've made yourself, they will all come and you'll be strengthened. And so they do all of this, and Ahithophel was consulted as if by an oracle. And he said to Absalom, let me choose 12,000 men. That's a pretty sizable number of people. And I will come upon him, David, when he is weary and discouraged, and I'll throw them into a panic, all of his men. And when all the people with him flee, I will strike down only the king, and I will bring his head back to you. And then... And they were all excited to hear that news. We're going to get rid of David, the king, my father, basically is Absalom's father. So then he consults with Hushai. And he says, well, what do you got to say to us? And, well, he tells us a little bit different, And, he says, the time the counsel as Ahithophel has given is not good, and so he kind of tells a little bit of a different story. And how many times does that happen? You ask two different people for advice or suggestions, and you get really totally different answers from them. So anyway, Hushai has given this advice, and then in verse 15 of chapter 17, Hushai says to the priests, thus and so, and send news to David. Therefore send quickly and tell David, do not lodge tonight, in this place, but go on. And so then, it says Jonathan and Ahimaaz were waiting, a servant girl. And so now this Jonathan isn't Solomon's son Jonathan. If, in the end of chapter 15, it says, verse 36, their two sons are with him, Zadok's son Ahimaaz and Abiathar's son Jonathan. So this is a different Jonathan than Saul's son, because Saul's son Jonathan was killed on the battlefield with his dad. But these two men are going to kind of spy things out and stay back, and Absalom, and they find out about them. But these two men are helped to escape, but they climbed down into a well, and the wells were just open holes dug in the ground, but they went down into this well, and then the people covered the well with something and put other stuff upon it. They camouflaged it, and so these two men, Jonathan and Ahimaaz, were saved because of that. And when this first seer Ahithophel saw that Absalom hadn't done what he told him to, he was distraught and thought, I'm no good anymore. But he ended up, he says, he went home and he hung himself, and because of the king, this Absalom had not listened to his counsel. And it's one of those sad things. I mean, if anybody takes his or her own life, it's just devastation for so many. But anyway, David and his men are on the run because of David's son Absalom. And then when we get to David and his son, they brought these other communities bring beds and barley and food for them. And and then in chapter 18, David mustered the men who were with him, and he said commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. So he had a lot of people with him too. It wasn't just a band of 400 or 500. He had thousands of men with him. And his commander Joab and Joab's brother are still with him. And Joab was, he was one of the leaders of the army in earlier places that we read. But they divided their forces into thirds, and David is going to go out with them to battle. And they say, no, you stay here, and you'll be, we'll go fight the battle for you. And as the battle is being fought, and it says in the forest of Ephraim, and I mean, these communities don't, stick in my head as to just where they are for locations, but he says, Absalom meets the servants of David, and he was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the branches of a great oak, and it says his head caught fast in the oak. What a horrible thing to happen. He got caught, and his mule went out from under him, and he's hanging there. And one of the men sees and tells the commander Joab about that. And he says, we should go and kill him. And Joab says, no, we don't do that. We aren't going to kill the son of the King David. But some of his men go and do that. It says 10 young men of Joab's harbor bearers surrounded him and struck him and killed him. And then Joab sounded the trumpet. It recalled the troops. The battle was over. And a sad ending, another sad ending that, David's son who had risen up against him, has died. And David again has to mourn another of his sons. And they come back from this battle, and they see the men coming running back, and it is one man has been set out to not tell David about the news of his son, and another one says, "Let me run that I may also go," and he outruns the first. And the first one that was running was not supposed to say anything. Well, the second one did. He went back and told David the sad news. And it's just, the verse 33, the end of where we're reading today. The king was deeply moved and went up to his chamber over the gate and wept. And as he wept, he says, "Oh, Absalom, Absalom, my son, would that I have died instead of you." I mean, this is the love we have for our children. I mean, our grandchildren. I mean, it's just, even when they disobey, even if they, we would much rather have them carry on and be safe and secure. And but David wept over his son. And I don't know, it's just more of the sad part of the history. And we all have those sad parts in our lives as well. And there's much sadness in the world, but the glory, the hope, the future was promised to us in Easter, which we celebrated just not even quite a week ago. Easter, the risen Lord Jesus Christ, leading us to grace and forgiveness through God.